The city was waking up with the sound of rushing cars, the chatter of shopkeepers, and the busy footsteps of people chasing their daily work. In the middle of that world lived Mr. Armin, a man who had built his fortune with years of struggle and sleepless nights. He was a millionaire now, respected by many, envied by some, but deep inside he was a lonely man who trusted very few. Success had given him wealth, but it had also brought betrayal. Friends had cheated him, relatives had used him, and employees had walked away after stealing his secrets. For Armin, trust was not something given, it was something earned, and very few ever passed that test. Armin lived in a large mansion on the edge of the city. Every corner of that house spoke of wealth, from the tall glass windows to the shining marble floors. Expensive cars rested in his garage, each one polished until it reflected the sky like a mirror. Yet, despite all this, Armin always believed that the people around him were more important than the luxuries he owned. He wanted loyalty, not only service. One quiet morning, Armin sat in his study, sipping tea while reading the news. His old driver, who had been with him for many years, had just retired a week ago. The man had served faithfully, never once breaking trust. Armin respected him greatly, but now he needed someone new. Hiring a driver might have seemed like a simple task for others, but for Armin it was something serious. Whoever sat behind the wheel would know his routines, his private meetings, and sometimes even his secrets. This person had to be more than a driver, he had to be someone who could be trusted with everything. After several interviews, one name caught his attention: Faisal. He was a young man in his late 20s, tall, with a calm presence in his eyes. His resume was simple, not filled with fancy schools or high-level jobs. He had worked as a delivery driver for a small company and had occasionally driven for a family friend. Nothing extraordinary, nothing that screamed perfection. But what stood out was his honesty during the interview. When Armin had asked him about his strengths, Faisal had replied, "Sir, I don't have much, but I have clean hands and a clear heart. I can drive safely, and I can protect what is not mine." Those words lingered in Armin's mind. Anyone could polish their skills, but not everyone could keep their heart clean. And so, Armin gave Faisal the job, though in his heart he knew this was only the beginning. The day Faisal arrived for his first duty, the mansion was shining in the morning light. He walked through the tall gates, holding a small worn-out bag in his hand. Unlike the polished cars around him, his shoes were old and his clothes simple, but his posture was straight and his eyes steady. The security guard looked at him, then nodded respectfully. Soon, Faisal stood in front of the main door, waiting nervously. Armin appeared after a few minutes, dressed in a neat suit, holding his usual briefcase. His sharp eyes scanned Faisal from head to toe, not in a cruel way, but in the way a man studies a book before deciding to read it. "Good morning," Armin said firmly. "Good morning, sir," Faisal replied with a small bow. His voice was calm, though inside his chest his heart was beating fast. This was not just a job to him, it was a chance to change his family's life. His mother was unwell, his younger siblings still in school, and every rupee mattered. He had promised himself he would not waste this opportunity. Armin led him to the garage and pointed at a black luxury car. "This will be the car you drive most of the time," he said. "Do you have experience with this model?" "Yes, sir," Faisal answered politely. He had driven many types of cars during his delivery jobs. He ran his hand gently over the steering wheel as if it were something precious. As they set out on the road, Armin sat quietly in the back seat, watching through the mirror. Faisal's driving was smooth, careful yet confident. He did not rush at signals, nor did he panic when other drivers cut across. He kept his eyes forward, his hands steady, and his focus sharp. But for Armin, this was not enough. Skill was important, yes, but honesty was greater. A dishonest man with perfect driving could still cause disaster. Armin thought back to the words Faisal had spoken in the interview. Could they be trusted? Or were they just words spoken to win a job? As the car rolled through the city, Armin's mind began to shape a plan. A plan that would test Faisal's true character, one that no resume or polite answer could reveal. Money, after all, was the greatest temptation. And only by facing it would Faisal's heart be truly uncovered. The drive ended with no mistakes, and Faisal carefully parked the car outside Armin's office building. Armin stepped out, giving him a brief nod, but his eyes carried thoughts that he kept hidden. To Faisal, it seemed like an ordinary first day. But for Armin, it was the beginning of something far more important. That evening, when Armin returned home, he stood in front of his study window, watching the fading sunset. The city lights began to flicker on, and he whispered to himself, "Tomorrow, the real test begins." And with that, the stage was quietly set for a trial that would not only reveal Faisal's honesty but also change both of their lives in a way neither of them could imagine. The next morning arrived quietly, but inside Mr. Armin's mind, there was a storm of thoughts. He had spent much of the night planning carefully, thinking about the best way to test Faisal. He was not a man who believed in chances, he believed in proof. Trust could not be handed to anyone without seeing their true face first. And for Armin, the only way to see a man's real character was to place temptation directly in front of him. As he walked across his study with a cup of tea, Armin's eyes fell upon a large leather briefcase resting near his desk. It was not an ordinary bag. Inside it, neatly arranged in bundles, was a large sum of cash enough to tempt even the most honest of men. The sight of it made Armin's lips tighten into a thin line. That briefcase was going to be the key to Faisal's test. Armin thought back to the betrayals of his past. Years ago, one of his trusted employees had stolen from him. Another had taken advantage of his kindness and sold secrets to competitors. He had learned the hard way that people's true colors were often hidden behind smiles and polite words. That was why, now, he never placed full trust in anyone without testing them first. Faisal had worked only one day so far, but Armin had seen enough to know the young man was skilled at driving. His calm manner and careful hands on the steering wheel had impressed him. Yet, skills were not enough. What Armin needed was honesty, the kind that could not be shaken even when the heart longed for something more. Later that morning, Armin called Faisal to get the car ready. The black luxury sedan stood shining in the driveway, polished like glass. Faisal quickly stepped forward, opened the door, and waited for his employer. Armin walked out of the house with the briefcase in his hand, looking as though he were in a hurry. "Good morning, sir," Faisal greeted with a respectful nod. Armin replied with a short nod and slipped into the back seat, placing the briefcase beside him. The car began to move through the streets as Faisal drove steadily, his eyes fixed on the road. Armin sat silently, his mind running with the details of his plan. When they reached the tall glass building where Armin's meeting was scheduled, he pretended to check his watch. "I'm late," he muttered, his voice sharp. He quickly stepped out of the car, leaving the briefcase on the seat beside him. His movements were fast, as if he had forgotten something important in his rush. Before closing the door, he looked at Faisal and said, "Stay here. I won't be long." Without another word, he walked into the building. The briefcase sat silently on the seat, heavy with money. Its presence filled the car with invisible weight. To an ordinary man, it might look like nothing more than a bag. But to anyone who knew what it contained, it was like a golden temptation calling out. What Faisal didn't know was that Armin had prepared carefully. Hidden inside the car were two small cameras, one facing the back seat and another near the front. They were well hidden, impossible to notice without a trained eye. Armin had arranged everything so he could watch later. Standing in the lobby of the building, Armin didn't actually attend any meeting. Instead, he quietly instructed a security officer, one of his old loyal employees, to keep an eye on Faisal from a distance outside. Armin wanted to see how long it would take before Faisal noticed the briefcase, and what choice he would make afterward. Meanwhile, Faisal sat behind the wheel. The minutes ticked by slowly. He shifted slightly in his seat, glancing into the mirror. That was when he saw the large leather briefcase, lying openly on the back seat. At first, he ignored it. He looked forward again, gripping the steering wheel. But the thought of what might be inside kept knocking at his mind. He had seen men like Armin before, wealthy men who carried more money in a single bag than an ordinary man could earn in years. Could it really be full of cash? His heart pounded as memories of his mother's tired face flashed before him. The bills for her medicine were stacking up. His younger brother needed money for school fees. His little sister often skipped meals just so the family could save. The thought struck him, if he took even a small part of what was inside that bag, no one would know. It could solve everything. But then, another thought pushed into his mind, his father's voice, long gone but never forgotten. Son, an honest man may be poor, but he sleeps with peace in his heart. A dishonest man may be rich, but his nights will never know rest. Faisal exhaled deeply, trying to steady himself. He knew what the right choice was, but temptation is not something that disappears quickly. His eyes kept flickering to the rear seat, as though the bag was calling his name. He reached for his phone, hesitated, then slowly dialed Armin's number. "Sir," he said when the call went to voicemail, "you left something in the car. Please come back soon." His voice was steady, though his palms were sweating. After ending the call, Faisal locked the car doors and stepped outside, leaning against the door to guard it. He didn't want anyone else to even come near. He folded his arms and kept his eyes sharp on the street. Inside the building, Armin watched all of this unfold through the report of his guard, his heart both heavy and hopeful. Faisal had seen the temptation, he had struggled with it, and yet he had chosen honesty, at least for now. The test was still not complete, but already, Armin felt something stirring inside him. Could it be that this time, he had finally found someone who valued integrity over wealth? The day was not over yet. But Armin knew, tomorrow would reveal even more. The car stood silently under the shade of a tree. The busy street around it was filled with the noise of people walking, shopkeepers calling customers, and the constant horns of impatient drivers. But inside that car, the silence was heavy because of the single leather briefcase lying on the back seat. Faisal sat in the driver's seat, his hands resting on the steering wheel, but his mind far away. He could feel the weight of the briefcase even though he wasn't touching it. It was as if the bag carried more than just money, it carried a test of his character. Every minute that passed only made the struggle inside him stronger. At first, he tried to distract himself. He looked at the people passing by, adjusted the mirror, and even hummed a small tune under his breath. But his eyes kept flickering toward the back seat. The bag was right there, inches away, quiet but powerful. He had seen enough in life to know that wealthy men like Armin often carried huge amounts of cash. That single bag could probably change his life forever. His mind began to paint pictures of possibilities. He imagined his mother smiling again, free from the worry of expensive medicine. He saw his younger brother walking proudly to school in a new uniform, books in his hand. He saw his little sister enjoying meals every day, never having to hide her hunger again. The money could solve every single problem that had kept his family awake at night. The temptation pulled at him like a magnet. His hands twitched slightly, almost rising from the wheel. What if I just opened it? He thought. No one would know. No one would see. But then, he took a deep breath. His father's voice echoed in his memory, as clear as if the man were sitting beside him. Son, honesty is the only wealth that never loses value. Once you lose it, no money in the world can bring it back. Faisal leaned back against the seat, closing his eyes for a moment. He knew he could not betray himself. Yet, he also knew how hard life had been. The struggle was real, and temptation was not an easy enemy. He opened his eyes and looked at the briefcase again. Slowly, almost against his will, his hand moved toward it. His fingers touched the leather for a brief second. The material felt smooth and expensive, almost whispering promises of a better tomorrow. His heart beat faster. But then he quickly pulled his hand back, as though the briefcase were fire. His breath came in short bursts. "No," he muttered to himself softly. "This is not mine. This can never be mine." To calm himself, Faisal stepped out of the car. The warm air hit his face, and he leaned against the door, looking around. A child selling flowers walked past, smiling at him with innocent eyes. Faisal's heart softened. He realized that if he took what was not his, he would lose the right to ever look at such innocence again without shame. Still, the battle inside him did not end. Even as he stood outside, guarding the car, the thoughts kept returning. What if Armin doesn't even notice? He is a millionaire. Would he really care about losing some cash? He shook his head, trying to push the thought away. Armin had trusted him with this car, with this moment. If he broke that trust now, what kind of man would he become? He remembered his mother's words when he had left for the job: "Son, always protect your name. Money can come and go, but once your name is dirty, it can never be cleaned." Back inside the building, Armin watched through the hidden cameras. He saw the way Faisal's eyes kept drifting to the briefcase, the way his hand had reached out for a moment and then pulled away. Armin's chest tightened. He knew this was the hardest part of the test, not ignoring the temptation completely, but facing it, feeling it, and still choosing the right path. Minutes turned into long, dragging hours. Faisal checked his phone, paced a little outside, then returned to sit in the car again. Each time, his eyes landed on the bag, but his decision grew stronger. Finally, he took his phone and recorded a message for Armin: "Sir, you left something in the car. I am keeping the doors locked and staying nearby. Don't worry, it is safe." After sending the message, he put the phone aside and sat upright, determination replacing doubt. He decided he would not let even a shadow of dishonesty touch him. Outside, the sky began to shift as afternoon turned toward evening. People around the street grew busier, but inside the car, Faisal felt a strange peace settle over him. Yes, the temptation was strong, but his choice was stronger. He had faced the test, and though the money had called to him again and again, he had refused to answer. Armin, still watching, allowed himself a rare smile. He had seen many men fail the same test in the past. But this time was different. Faisal's struggle was real, yet his honesty had held firm. The test was not finished, but Armin's heart already knew this young man was not ordinary. And so, the briefcase remained untouched, heavy with money but silent with respect. The temptation had come like a storm, but Faisal had stood against it. The clock kept ticking, and the city outside moved with its usual rhythm. But for Faisal, the world seemed to have slowed down. He sat in the car, still guarding the briefcase, still wrestling with thoughts that refused to leave his mind. It felt as if two voices were speaking inside him, one whispering of an easy life if he just gave in, the other reminding him of the heavy cost of dishonesty. Every time he looked at the bag, the same battle started again. He thought of his sick mother lying on her bed, coughing through the night because she could not afford stronger medicine. He thought of his younger brother, who had dreams of becoming a teacher but might have to leave school without proper fees. And he thought of his little sister, who often hid her hunger so that the rest of the family could eat. That bag could end all of it. Just a few bundles from inside would be enough to give them a better life. Faisal's chest tightened as tears formed in his eyes. Why did life make it so hard for people who worked honestly? Why did others get to enjoy everything while his family suffered? But then, He wiped his face quickly. He could not allow himself to think like that. Taking what was not his would not erase his problems, it would only make them worse. His family had raised him on honesty. His late father had left him only one lesson: son, poverty is heavy, but shame is heavier. Faisal repeated those words in his heart again and again, like a shield protecting him. He pulled out his phone once more and looked at the message he had already sent to Armin. A small thought worried him. What if Mr. Armin believes I touched the bag? What if he thinks I tried to take something even though I didn't? That fear was real, and it made his heart pound harder than before. Still, he decided that the only way to show his honesty was to stay where he was, to keep the car safe, and to wait patiently until his employer returned. Faisal locked the doors again and straightened his posture, his eyes sharp and watchful. The decision was made. The money would remain untouched, no matter how much his life needed it. Meanwhile, inside the building, Armin was watching everything from the hidden camera feed on his tablet. He saw Faisal's hesitation, his pain, his tears, and finally his strength. The young man had been tempted, yes, but what mattered was the choice he had made afterward. Armin's heart softened as he realized he was witnessing something rare. Still, Armin wanted to be sure. A single choice could be an accident, but a firm decision showed true character. He decided to let more time pass, to test Faisal's patience as well as his honesty. Hours dragged on. The sun began to sink lower in the sky, painting the streets in golden light. Faisal grew tired, but he did not move away from the car. People passed by, some curious enough to glance at the expensive vehicle, but Faisal remained alert. At one point, a man walked too close, pretending to look inside. Faisal immediately stepped forward and stood firmly between the stranger and the car. The man left, muttering under his breath, but Faisal did not relax until the street was clear again. Inside, he was exhausted. His stomach growled from hunger, and his throat felt dry. But he reminded himself that this was his duty to protect what belonged to his employer. He could not let weakness take over. Finally, as the sky turned a darker shade of blue, Armin appeared at the entrance of the building. He walked slowly toward the car, his sharp eyes fixed on Faisal. The young driver quickly opened the door for him and stood respectfully. "Everything all right?" Armin asked, his voice calm but carrying weight. "Yes, sir," Faisal replied, his tone steady. "You left your briefcase in the car." "I locked the doors and stayed nearby to make sure no one touched it." Armin's gaze shifted to the bag lying on the back seat. Untouched. Exactly where he had left it. He looked back at Faisal, studying his face carefully. There was no nervousness in the young man's expression, only sincerity. "You didn't even open it?" Armin asked slowly, as if searching for any sign of guilt. Faisal shook his head. "Sir, what belongs to you should remain untouched by me. I would rather struggle with my own problems than betray the trust you gave me." The words struck Armin deeply. He had heard many people speak of loyalty, but rarely with such honesty. For a moment, the millionaire felt something unusual in his chest, a warmth that he hadn't felt in years. But he did not show it. Instead, he simply nodded and stepped into the car. "Drive," he ordered quietly. As Faisal drove them back home, the city lights flickering outside, the silence between them was heavy yet meaningful. For Faisal, it felt like he had just carried the weight of the world and managed to put it down without breaking. For Armin, it felt like he had just seen a glimpse of something rare, a man who valued honesty above money. The test was not over yet. But the choice Faisal made that evening had already left a mark on Armin's heart. The car rolled smoothly through the glowing streets as the evening lights came alive. Faisal sat behind the wheel, his focus sharp as always, but inside his heart was restless. He could feel Armin's eyes on him from the back seat, silent yet heavy, as if every movement he made was being judged. Faisal knew that the forgotten briefcase was not a small matter. No ordinary man would leave such a thing behind so carelessly. Armin leaned back in his seat, his mind deep in thought. He had seen the camera footage, had witnessed Faisal's struggle with temptation and his final decision to guard the briefcase. But now, he wanted to hear the truth directly from the young man himself. Hidden cameras could capture actions, but words revealed the soul. When they reached the mansion, Faisal carefully parked the car in its usual spot. He quickly stepped out, opened the back door, and respectfully stood aside for his employer. Armin picked up the briefcase, his hand resting on it for a long second before stepping out. His sharp eyes turned toward Faisal. "Come with me," Armin said simply. Faisal nodded, his heart beating faster. He followed Armin inside the grand mansion. The tall chandeliers glowed warmly, and the polished floor reflected the light like water. Yet, despite the beauty, the air felt heavy, as though the walls themselves were waiting for what was about to happen. Armin walked into his study, a quiet room filled with shelves of books and awards. He placed the briefcase gently on the table, then turned to Faisal. For a long moment, he said nothing, only studied the young man's face. Finally, he spoke. "Do you know what was inside this?" Faisal hesitated for a second. His eyes dropped to the floor, then lifted again with honesty. "I can guess, sir." "Money." Armin raised an eyebrow. "And yet, you did not open it?" "No, sir," Faisal replied, his voice steady. "It did not belong to me. I had no right." Armin's eyes narrowed slightly, not in anger but in curiosity. "Why? You could have taken it. No one would have known. You could have solved your problems. Isn't your family struggling?" The words struck Faisal like an arrow. His heart sank because it was true, his family was struggling. He thought of his mother, his brother, his sister. For a brief moment, his throat tightened. But then he lifted his head and answered clearly, "Yes, sir, we are struggling. But if I used what was not mine, then the food on their table would be bitter, the clothes on their back would carry shame. Struggle is better than betrayal." The room went silent. The ticking of the wall clock echoed loudly in the background. Armin studied him deeply, as if searching for any crack in his words. But Faisal's face showed no fear, only the calmness of truth. "You remind me of a man I once knew," Armin said slowly. His voice carried a rare softness. "Many years ago, I trusted someone the way I trusted you today. But he failed me. He chose greed. Since then, I have trusted no one completely." He tapped the briefcase lightly. "That is why I left this here. It was no accident. It was a test." Faisal's eyes widened slightly. His suspicions were confirmed. It had been a test all along. He felt both relieved and nervous. Relieved that he had passed, but nervous that such a test had even been needed. Armin stepped closer, his voice lowering. "And you chose differently. I saw the cameras. I saw how you looked at the bag, how you fought with yourself. I know it wasn't easy. But you walked away from temptation. That matters more to me than anything else." Faisal felt his chest tighten with emotion. He had never expected his honesty to be noticed, let alone praised. He bowed his head respectfully. "Sir, I did what was right. That is all." Armin placed a hand on the briefcase and looked at him firmly. "Do you know what you've given me today?" Faisal shook his head. "Peace of mind," Armin said softly. "Something I haven't felt in years." For a long moment, silence filled the room again, but it was no longer heavy. It was a silence of understanding. Faisal's choice had spoken louder than any promise could. But Armin was not a man who gave trust lightly, even after such a moment. He decided to push one last time, to see if Faisal's resolve was truly unshakable. "Tell me, Faisal," he asked suddenly, if I offered you half of what is inside this bag right now, would you take it? Faisal's heart skipped, but he smiled faintly and shook his head. No, sir. I do not need what does not belong to me. Give it to me as a gift, and I will thank you. But if I must take it dishonestly, then I would rather not touch it at all. Armin's eyes glistened, though he quickly blinked it away. The young man's words carried a strength that even wealth could not buy. For the first time in a very long while, the millionaire felt his guard begin to lower. He closed the briefcase with a firm click and nodded. That will be all for tonight. You may go home now. Tomorrow, we will begin fresh. Faisal bowed respectfully and left the room. As he stepped out into the cool night air, a strange feeling of relief filled him. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, but tonight, he had kept his name clean. Inside the study, Armin remained standing by the table, his hands still resting on the briefcase. His mind replayed Faisal's words, his honesty, his calm refusal. And slowly, a rare smile formed on his face. Perhaps, after years of disappointment, he had finally found someone worth trusting. The next morning came with a soft golden sunrise, but inside Armin's mansion, the atmosphere was far from ordinary. The night before had left both men thoughtful in different ways. Faisal, at his small home, had gone to bed with mixed feelings, tired from the long day, but at peace for making the right choice. He did not know what Armin truly thought of him, nor what the future would bring, but he had promised himself he would stay honest no matter the outcome. On the other side, Armin had barely slept. He had sat in his study for hours, staring at the briefcase on his desk. The test had been risky, but Faisal's honesty had surprised him. He had seen men with higher education, polished manners, and expensive suits fall into the trap of greed. Yet, this young man, who owned little more than his clean hands and sincere eyes, had stood firm. For Armin, it was not just unusual, it was rare, almost precious. By morning, Armin had made a decision. It was time to reveal the truth. When Faisal arrived, dressed neatly in his simple clothes, he was surprised to be called inside the mansion instead of directly to the garage. The guards led him to the study, where Armin was already waiting. The large briefcase rested on the table, its presence once again commanding attention. "Good morning, sir," Faisal said politely, bowing slightly. Armin nodded, his sharp eyes watching the young man carefully. "Good morning, Faisal. Sit down." Faisal hesitated for a moment but then obeyed, lowering himself into the chair opposite his employer. He could feel the weight of the situation, though he did not fully understand it yet. Armin placed a hand on the briefcase. His voice was calm, but it carried depth. "Do you know why I left this bag in the car yesterday?" Faisal swallowed and shook his head. "I thought maybe it was a mistake, sir." "You were in a hurry." A small smile touched Armin's lips, though his eyes remained serious. "No, Faisal. It was not a mistake. It was deliberate. That bag was never forgotten. It was left there for one reason: to test you." Faisal's eyes widened slightly. The truth hit him like a wave. His suspicion had been correct all along. The bag, the silence, the temptation, it had all been planned. Armin continued, opening the bag slowly to reveal the neat bundles of cash inside. The sight of so much money made the air feel heavier. "This is what I left behind yesterday. Enough money to change a man's life in one moment. And yet, you did not touch it?" Faisal lowered his gaze. "Because it was not mine, sir." Armin leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Do you know how many men have failed this same test before you? Some took the money and ran. Some tried to lie. Others made excuses. But you stood firm. I watched you through hidden cameras, Faisal. I saw your struggle, your hesitation, and then your decision. You chose honesty." The young man's heart raced. He felt both exposed and relieved. "Sir, I only did what was right. Nothing more. Nothing more." Armin repeated with a quiet laugh. "You think honesty is nothing more?" "No, Faisal. Honesty is everything. It is the one thing that cannot be bought, yet it is the most valuable." He paused, his voice turning thoughtful. "Do you know what you gave me yesterday?" Faisal looked up curiously. "Hope," Armin said simply. "For years, I believed trust was dead. I believed loyalty was just a word people used until they saw money. But you proved me wrong." The room fell silent. Faisal's eyes grew moist, though he quickly blinked away the emotion. He had not expected such words, not from a man like Armin. Armin closed the briefcase and pushed it aside. "From today, you are no longer just my driver. You will be more than that. I want you close, not behind the wheel alone, but by my side as someone I can trust. Your salary will be doubled, and your family will be cared for." Faisal's breath caught in his throat. His lips parted, but no words came at first. The weight of those words sank deep into his heart. He had entered this mansion as a simple driver, but now his life was about to change completely. "Sir," he said finally, his voice trembling with gratitude, "I do not know how to thank you." "Do not thank me," Armin replied firmly. "Thank yourself. Your honesty has brought you here. Remember this moment. Money will always whisper, but if you can silence it with truth, no one can defeat you." Faisal nodded, his chest filled with pride and humility at the same time. He knew his family's struggles were far from over, but now there was light at the end of the road. Armin leaned back in his chair, his eyes still on the young man. For the first time in many years, his guarded heart felt lighter. He had not only tested a driver, he had discovered a man who reminded him that trust, though rare, was not dead. That day, as Faisal drove Armin to his next meeting, the car felt different. The silence was no longer heavy with suspicion. It was calm, almost peaceful, like the beginning of a new chapter. And inside both their hearts, a quiet truth settled in: life could test a man in many ways, but in the end, it was the choices he made that defined who he truly was. The days that followed were unlike anything Faisal had ever imagined. Each morning when he woke up, he felt as though life had opened a new door for him. He was still the same person, living in the same small house with his family, but something deep within had changed. His honesty had brought him honor, respect, and trust from a man who had the power to change his future. At first, Faisal thought Armin's words were only temporary promises. But soon he realized that Armin was a man who meant what he said. Faisal's salary was raised, just as promised. He was given extra allowances to make sure his family could live comfortably. His younger brother's school fees were paid directly by the company, and his mother received the best medical care in a private hospital. For the first time, Faisal felt his family breathe freely. The stress that had hung over their small home for years slowly lifted. His brother no longer studied under a weak candlelight, now he had proper books, uniforms, and even a computer for his schoolwork. His mother, whose health had been failing, smiled again after a long time, telling Faisal that she felt proud to see him not only as a son but as the man who had lifted them out of hardship. But beyond money and comfort, what Faisal valued most was something else. It was the way Armin now looked at him with trust. Every ride, every meeting, every private conversation in the car was filled with respect. Armin would often speak to Faisal as though he were not just a driver but a companion. He shared stories of his struggles, his fears, and his loneliness at the top. He admitted that money had brought him power but had also built walls around his heart. Faisal listened carefully, never judging, only offering simple words that came from his clean heart. And slowly, Armin realized that wealth meant little without trust and companionship. One evening, after a long day of business meetings, Armin asked Faisal to drive him to the old part of the city. The car rolled down narrow streets, past markets filled with lights, voices, and the smell of food. Finally, Armin told him to stop near a small orphanage. Faisal was surprised, but he parked the car and followed his employer inside. The orphanage was filled with children, some laughing, some shy, some running around in joy. Their clothes were simple, their shoes worn, but their eyes sparkled with innocence. The caretaker explained how difficult it was to manage expenses, how they struggled to give the children proper education and food. Faisal watched as Armin stood silently, his eyes softening. For a moment, the millionaire who was feared by businessmen looked nothing more than a kind man with a heavy heart. Then, without a word, he pulled out his checkbook and signed a donation large enough to run the orphanage for many years. The caretaker's eyes filled with tears, and the children cheered around him. Faisal stood in quiet awe, realizing he was witnessing a side of Armin no one else probably knew. As they walked back to the car, Armin spoke quietly. "Do you see, Faisal? Money has no meaning when it only fills your own house. But when it fills the hands of those who have nothing, it becomes powerful." Faisal nodded, his heart moved. "Yes, sir. You are right. Money is a tool. It depends on how we use it." Armin looked at him with a proud smile. "That is why I chose you, Faisal. You remind me that wealth should never control a man, it should serve him." From that day, Armin involved Faisal in more than just driving. He took him to charity meetings, asked for his opinion in small matters, and even introduced him to trusted partners as a man I trust with my life. Faisal remained humble, always remembering where he came from, always careful never to let pride enter his heart. Weeks turned into months, and their bond grew stronger. The people in the mansion respected Faisal, not only because of his position but because of the way Armin treated him. They saw how a simple driver, with nothing but honesty, had earned a place in the life of a man who trusted no one. One night, as Faisal drove Armin home, the older man broke the silence. "Faisal," he said, his tone calm but meaningful, "I am getting old. My business empire is large, but I do not want to leave it in the hands of people who only love money. I need someone loyal by my side. Someone who understands values, not just wealth." Faisal's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He could feel the weight of the words but remained quiet. Armin continued, "One day, when I step back, I want you to be more than just an employee. I want you to oversee my charities, to protect the people who depend on me. You will not just drive me, you will drive my vision forward." Faisal's throat went dry. His eyes filled, and he had to blink to see clearly. He never dreamed such responsibility would be given to him. "Sir," he whispered, his voice breaking, "I don't know if I am worthy." Armin placed a hand on his shoulder. "You are worthy, Faisal. Because worthiness is not measured by what a man owns but by what he refuses to take when it is not his." Tears slipped down Faisal's cheek, though he quickly wiped them away. That night, as he drove through the quiet streets, he realized his life had changed forever. He had once been just a poor young man searching for a job. He had once looked at wealth as something distant, unreachable. But now he understood, wealth was not the true treasure. Honesty, trust, and integrity were. And so, the story that had begun with a forgotten briefcase full of cash ended with something far greater: the discovery that the richest man was not the one with the most money, but the one who knew how to keep his heart pure even when tested. Faisal had passed the test, and in doing so, he had earned not just wealth, but something eternal: respect, trust, and a future filled with purpose.